October 12th, 2008, Des Moines, Iowa. The air had a sharp bite as autumn settled into the streets of Des Moines. The rustling of dry leaves echoed through the alleyways behind Lincoln High School. It was here, among the decaying foliage and rusted fences, that the students first began to whisper about Patrick. Patrick was strange. He wasn't like anyone else. He wore the same dark hoodie every day, the hood pulled low over his eyes, which were always hidden behind mirrored sunglasses, even inside the dimly lit classrooms. His clothes seemed too big for his thin, wiry frame, and no matter what the temperature was, his hands stayed buried deep in his pockets. Most days, Patrick moved through the hallways as if in a trance, his head low, rarely speaking unless he had to. It was said that Patrick believed he was a demon, and not the kind from movies or comic books. No, Patrick's claim was far darker. He whispered that he had come from somewhere else, an ancient place, where his true form lay hidden behind a mask of flesh. Most of the other students didn't take him seriously. Why would they? He was just Patrick, awkward, silent, and always watching from the shadows. The first time the narrator noticed Patrick was during her sophomore year. Her name was Jenna Thompson, a quiet girl herself, who liked to read in the library during lunch. Patrick had just sat down across from her, uninvited, his sunglasses reflecting her puzzled expression back at her. "You're safe now," he had said, his voice barely above a whisper. She had stared at him, unsure what he meant. "Safe from what?" she had asked, glancing nervously around to see if anyone was watching. "From me," Patrick had answered simply, his lips barely moving as he spoke. Jenna hadn't known how to respond. It wasn't like she'd ever been afraid of him before, but something in his tone chilled her. From that moment on, he started to follow her. Not in a way that drew attention, but subtly, always just a few steps behind, just far enough that no one else noticed. At first, she thought it was a joke, some sort of creepy infatuation, but it wasn't long before the other students began to notice something off about Patrick as well. The rumors began to spread after that. People said that Patrick had adopted Jenna. He had done it to others before, randomly choosing students who suddenly found themselves under his protection. If Patrick said you were safe, you never had to worry about him. But if he hadn't adopted you, if you ever crossed him, well, the stories of those kids would fade into silence. The ones Patrick hadn't protected avoided him like the plague. Jenna found herself trapped in a strange bubble, unspoken tension tightening around her like a noose. What disturbed Jenna most wasn't Patrick himself, but the way strange things seemed to happen whenever someone said his name 3 times in a row. It had started out as a joke, a group of kids messing around during lunch, daring each other to say, "Patrick, Patrick, Patrick." At first, nothing would happen, but within a few minutes, Patrick would appear, standing just behind the group, his face blank and unmoving behind those mirrored sunglasses. The first time it happened, it seemed like a coincidence, but then it kept happening. No matter where he was, Patrick would just be there. He wouldn't speak, wouldn't move, just stand there like a statue until the silence grew unbearable. Some students began to say he could hear his name from anywhere in the school, that he could sense it like a predator sensing its prey. Jenna's friend Lily was the first one to challenge the rumor outside of school. One Friday night, they were at Lily's house sprawled out on her bed, flipping through magazines and talking about boys. The conversation inevitably turned to Patrick. "Do you think the whole 3 times thing is real?" Lily asked, laughing it off. Jenna shrugged, not wanting to admit the knot in her stomach whenever Patrick's name came up. "Well, there's only one way to find out." Lily grinned and, with mock theatrics, said his name 3 times. "Patrick, Patrick, Patrick." They both waited, tense silence hanging in the room. Nothing happened. Lily rolled her eyes, laughing it off. But then there was a knock at the door, a slow, deliberate knock. When Lily's mother called out from downstairs, "Jenna, someone's here to see you," her heart stopped. She walked down the hallway, fear prickling her skin. Standing on the porch was Patrick, soaked from the rain. His hoodie clung to him, and water dripped from the edge of his sunglasses. He didn't smile, didn't acknowledge the storm raging around him. He simply stared at her. "I was summoned," he said quietly, the words cutting through the rain like a knife. Jenna couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. Lily stood frozen at the top of the stairs, her hand covering her mouth. They hadn't told anyone where they were. How could he have known? Patrick didn't move. He didn't even seem to blink. Then, just as quickly as he had appeared, he turned and walked back into the rain, disappearing into the shadows as if he'd never been there. The next morning, Jenna found something horrifying. In her backyard, beneath the towering oak tree, was Patrick's hoodie. It was folded neatly with one of her own bracelets laid on top. One she hadn't even realized was missing. Laid on top, one she hadn't even realized was missing. From that moment, Jenna's fear became something tangible, something that gnawed at her every waking moment. Patrick wasn't just strange, he was dangerous, and she had been adopted. Jenna stared at the hoodie beneath the oak tree for what felt like an eternity, her breath frozen in her chest. She hadn't seen Patrick since the night before, since the rain-soaked figure had stood on Lily's doorstep. But now here was his hoodie, neatly placed in her backyard as if to send her a message. The bracelet on top, her bracelet, hadn't been missing, at least not to her knowledge. But there it was, looped innocently around the sleeve, as if it belonged to him now. She didn't dare touch the hoodie. Instead, she backed away, her eyes darting nervously around the yard, half expecting Patrick to step out from behind a tree, silent and watching. But no one was there. It was just her, the hoodie, and the biting chill in the autumn air. Jenna ran inside and slammed the door, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She grabbed her phone and called Lily, her hands shaking as she waited for the line to connect. "Lily, he's been here," she blurted as soon as her friend picked up. "Patrick, his hoodie is in my yard. And my bracelet, how did he—" Lily's voice was frantic on the other end. "What do you mean he's been there? How does he know where you live?" "I don't know," Jenna snapped, panic rising in her throat. "I don't know how he found me, but I don't feel safe." There was a long pause before Lily spoke again, her voice trembling. "Jenna, we have to tell someone. This is too weird. What if he's watching us right now?" Jenna swallowed hard, her eyes flicking back to the window. The thought made her skin crawl. She could almost feel his eyes on her, somewhere in the distance, waiting. But who could they tell? The school wouldn't believe them. The teachers saw Patrick as an oddball but harmless. And the police? What would they say? "Some creepy kid dropped off his hoodie at your house. So what?" It wasn't enough. Jenna sighed. "I'll figure something out. Just don't say his name, okay? Not 3 times. Not ever." The next few days passed in a blur of paranoia and sleepless nights. Patrick was at school, of course, just like always. He would sit in the back of class, his face obscured by his hood and sunglasses, always staring, always watching. He never spoke to her directly, but Jenna could feel his presence everywhere she went. The other students hadn't noticed the tension, but to Jenna it was suffocating. She avoided the hallways where Patrick lingered, kept her head down, and stayed close to her friends. But even when she was with them, the fear gnawed at her, a constant creeping dread that Patrick was always near. It was on a Thursday after another sleepless night that things escalated. Jenna was walking home alone after school, the leaves crunching beneath her shoes as she made her way down the quiet suburban streets. Her house was only a few blocks away, but the sun was setting quickly, casting long, eerie shadows over the road. As she turned the corner, she saw him. Patrick stood at the end of the block, completely still, his hood pulled low over his face. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched as she approached. Panic surged through Jenna's body, her legs freezing in place. She wanted to run, to scream, but her voice was caught in her throat. And then he took a step forward. Jenna backed away, her pulse racing, but Patrick's movements were slow, deliberate. He wasn't in any hurry. He knew she had nowhere to go. The street was empty, the house is dark, and the cold air wrapped around her like a noose. "What do you want?" she finally managed to choke out, her voice trembling. Patrick stopped a few feet from her, tilting his head slightly to one side, as if considering her question. Then in a voice so quiet she could barely hear it, he whispered, "I told you. You're safe." Jenna shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "Safe from what?" Patrick didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and metallic. Jenna's heart dropped as she realized what it was. Her house key, the one she had lost earlier that week. "How did you get that?" she demanded, her voice rising in panic. Patrick didn't respond. He simply held the key out toward her, dangling it in front of her like bait. But she didn't dare take it. Something in his posture, in the slow, deliberate way he moved, made her realize that this was no longer just about him being a creepy kid with a strange obsession. Patrick wasn't just Patrick. He was something else. Without another word, Patrick dropped the key at her feet and walked past her, his footsteps soft against the pavement. Jenna turned, watching in horror as he disappeared into the twilight, vanishing around the corner as if he'd never been there at all. That night, Jenna couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind against the window sent her heart racing. She had locked the doors, bolted the windows, but it didn't matter. Patrick had her key. He could get in anytime he wanted. As the hours dragged on, Jenna lay awake, staring at the ceiling, until she heard it, a soft, deliberate knock at the front door. Her blood ran cold. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. The knock came again, louder this time. And then she heard it, his voice muffled through the door, but unmistakable. "I was summoned." Terror gripped her as she realized what had happened. In her panicked conversation with Lily earlier that day, she had said his name 3 times. Slowly, Jenna got out of bed, her legs trembling as she made her way to the window. She pulled back the curtain, just enough to see the porch. There he was. Patrick stood in the rain, just as he had that night at Lily's house. His hood was pulled low, his sunglasses reflecting the dim glow of the streetlights. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, waiting. Jenna backed away from the window, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew now that Patrick wasn't human. He was something far worse, and he had been summoned. Jenna never opened the door that night, but the next morning when she finally found the courage to look outside, Patrick was gone. All that was left on the porch was her house key and the unmistakable imprint of clawed footprints in the wet earth. Patrick never returned to school after that. The teachers said he had transferred, but no one knew where. The rumors continued to swirl about who he really was and what had happened to him. But for Jenna, one thing was certain. He had left, but he could always be summoned again.